conferences online. It'll be on YouTube for everyone and the whole world to critique. So don't be afraid. It's all good.
Okay.
So anyway.
And to answer Nish's question, yes, the idea is that we will record the video, we will post it, and we'll put a link in the meetup so that you can view it offline later. And
hopefully attached to our YouTube channel. So anyway, welcome everyone. So December's Brisbane Azure user group. We're getting closer and closer to being COVID-free, which means that we can actually return to the office. So I'm super happy for whenever that happens in the next year sometime. Maybe after we've all had our vax shots, who knows. But when that does happen, it's going to be super awesome. In the meantime, perhaps this is the forum or the live events. We're still trying to figure that out. Welcome to December. Got a wonderful presenter lined up. No pressure, Todd.
Now I'm nervous.
Yes, but before that, there's a little bit of news, not a lot. But we also need to make sure that we thank our sponsors. So Codify and Microsoft have been truly awesome throughout the years, and they're both supporting the Azure user group in a wonderful way. Without our sponsors, this couldn't be possible. So I really do want to shout out to Codify and Microsoft. They're pretty awesome for helping us out. Also, if you guys want to get involved, we've had an awesome year this year with participation and people getting involved. Next year is going to be amazing. I'm not showing you next year's slide, but it's coming. So if you want to get involved, January spot is currently open. It's free. If you're keen to get up and present, it doesn't have to be a full presentation. It can just be, whatever you're okay with sharing. Some learnings from Azure, some really cool things that you've done. Overall, it doesn't matter. If you want to do a part presentation or a full presentation, let us know. So if you want to do a part one, it's 20 minutes, just share with us what's happening. A full one, like an hour. Plenty of time for questions and participation. It's really easy to get involved and actually tell us what you're doing. Anything is okay. So tonight we have Todd, who's going to share with us some of the really cool latest and greatest things that we can be doing in Azure, but it doesn't have to always be the latest and greatest. So even the things that are fairly normal are things that the community would probably want to hear. So when you're putting that presentation together, don't think you have to do the latest. It can just be what you're doing, what you appreciate, which things to avoid, which things to embrace. So it doesn't have to be a full-on pressure situation. It's just participation, getting involved, getting your face out there. That's the important thing. Flick us the link. We're really keen to hear from you if you want to get involved. So tonight, a few updates, not many. Hybrid benefits for Linux, that's coming along a long way. So you can now leverage those hybrid benefits and it can make things a lot easier. So it gives you that sort of managed experience that you're very accustomed to with Azure. You can get all of the interactions in the same way as everything else. It gives you a nice seamless experience, and you can take those licenses that you're getting from Red Hat or other places, and you can bring them in and bundle them into Azure. So it makes it a really easy, seamless experience. It allows you to leverage some of those licenses you already probably have in your organization. Importantly, Azure Arc. Azure Arc is a massive thing. Don't write it off. It's awesome and it's compatible with this. So as we go forward, you're going to see more and more things from Azure Arc, and that allows you to run things not only in Azure, but in any location you want. If you want to run things in AWS, you can. You can run Azure in AWS now with Azure Arc. So that's a great capability. So the other thing is So Azure Monitor, it's reaching out a little bit more, and you're able to get more from your guest health information and surface that up into Azure Monitor and see what's going on. It just gives you that extra visibility into your own VMs. Not everything has to be SaaS or PaaS. You can still use your own guests. It's okay. And Azure Monitor is there to help you do that sort of thing. A couple of events coming up. So Integration Down Under, it's pretty cool. We do have someone here who's quite passionate about Integration Down Under. Just wave. I'm sure they can see you. Yep. So it's pretty awesome. So Dan's also helping out with that group as well. So that's amazing. You know, ask the experts night. So that's pretty cool.
And I might just point out that tomorrow night's pretty special in that we've got Beck Lyons joining us, who's new to the product team for Logic Apps. So yeah, what a great, you know, some fresh blood in there. It'd be great to check in, get her perspective, and if you have any burning questions, or she's quite passionate about hearing about people's experiences and what their pain points are. So if you've been working with Logic Apps and you know you're wishing, gee, I wish this happened or whatever, come tomorrow night and you'll have a chance to voice it.
Absolutely. Bunch of resources that we always share with you. So the Slack channel, YouTube channel, and we've got a couple of training opportunities there for you as well. So if you're interested in that, jump on that. These slides will be available. And then going on from that, these are some of the blogs that I really like. I think these blogs are great. Absolutely, you know, you don't have to read everyone, but have a look. They're pretty cool. All right, so without any further ado, and that's Todd's sort of like warm-up message, we have the latest and greatest from Todd Whitehead. So over to you, Todd.
Thanks, mate. I'll just present this, do this sharing thing. Do you might need to give me permission to share, I think.
You should just be able to grab it.
Yeah, oh, hang on, it's coming up. It's just a bit slow. There we go. Okay. All right, hopefully you've got it. And it goes on the right screen.
Yep, we can see it.
You got me? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Oh, I've lost Teams now. Hang on, where's Teams? So yeah, so I guess the idea of this, and I just realized this is like the second one I've done this year, and it's another kind of update one, which is, you know, which is great, but you know, I'll promise I'll do something a little more interesting next year. But Dan and I had spoken about Microsoft has kind of two big events throughout the year that they we typically announce our latest and greatest updates. So one being Build, which is sort of developer focused, and one being Ignite, which is traditionally was more IT pro focused. I think now with the nature of cloud, I think the distinction between the two is sort of blurred pretty heavily, that I don't think they're really that different anymore. So we were going to do kind of an update on that, and because we got, you know, a few things got in the way, we didn't do it. I've kind of morphed this a bit. And what I really want to do is, I guess, have a look at what's new from Ignite, but also since Ignite. So it's kind of covering off the last quarter, if you like. Lots of good stuff. So now, Dan, I might have to get you to moderate and let me know if anyone wants to ask a question in chat or anything. But yeah, the idea of this, we're back in normal Teams mode. So I'll go through what I want to cover, but please yell out. There's a ton of updates, and I'm going to be a little bit opinionated in what I think is what I get excited about, and I'll talk about those a bit more, and maybe just skim over some of the other ones. But if I do that, and you see something that you particularly want to talk about, please, you know, either in the chat or just come off mute and yell out, and we can have a look at it and talk about it, because there's probably other people as well. Because if we covered everything, we'd literally be here all night. It's kind of quite scary when you think about it. So, okay, have I got? Oh, there we go. So this year's been obviously weird and a complete blur. But there's been quite a few updates. So this is the kind of major updates for the back half of this year. So it's not a small list. Oh, look, we're up to June. Okay. And I think, yeah, with the time distortion going on this year, you sometimes kind of forget there's been a lot going on. Obviously, everyone going in and out of work and all those things. And yeah, things have kind of flown by, and it's sometimes been a little bit kind of difficult to keep up to date. So as I said, what I want to do is go through and kind of call out the things that I think are important or of particular note. But other people will have different perspectives. So please yell out and stop me or challenge me or do whatever, and we'll kind of go from there. That's the plan. So the updates are kind of broken up by the category they're in, and I've cut out and hidden stuff that I didn't think would be particularly of interest to a whole lot of people, and kind of focused on the core stuff. So the first one being AI and machine learning. So this is kind of the way I've kind of got this material together. There's kind of like a timeline. So some of it back to August, September, October through to now. And note, some of it will be preview, some of it will be GA, some of it will be coming. And I'll try and get that as accurate as I can. So a whole bunch, obviously, in September was the Ignite, which is why there's so many announcements there. So you can see, I mean, obviously a whole lot of things, but I guess the main thing I noticed here was a lot of things going GA. So things that have been around in preview for a little while around machine learning. And I'm not a machine learning person, but lots of interesting stuff. Probably the ones that I saw there that most relevant to a lot of people. So, I mean, these cognitive services, things like cognitive search, are, I guess, aimed at developers, so very developer friendly. More than data scientists. So I guess some of the key things I noticed there was that you can now leverage managed identities rather than just keys to call these services, as well as them being available over private endpoints. So that's often a bit of a sticking point for some customers, depending on what sector you're in. So that was available. And also some new ones that are in preview that I thought were quite interesting, and I've started to play with them, but haven't got too far yet. One is Metrics Advisor. And in fact, I think I actually, if I go forward, yeah, I actually have some details on these. So Metrics Advisor, so that's a machine learning model that's really, you can basically point whatever metrics you want to monitor. So that might be, you know, financial metrics, it might be technical metrics, and these are AI models that are kind of designed around detecting patterns in metricy differences. So, you know, where you're collecting, you know, certain indications over a period of time, and it has some powerful ways of doing that, which is quite interesting. Another one, and obviously very much shaped by the 2020 we've had, right? So the new one around spatial analysis vision service. So obviously things like detecting social, you know, distance between people, but also just generally how people are moving around in a space and understanding their movements and patterns. Kind of a new addition to the vision family of cognitive services. So that's in public preview as of Ignite. Kind of a related one there. I've used this one a bit in IoT scenarios. So anomaly detection, another cognitive service. So again, looking for not so much understanding of why something's happened or whatever, but you can imagine if you had a temperature or vibration sensor, rather than just feeding that back and displaying it, it's an AI trained model that can detect anomalies, things that are outside the bounds of what you would expect, not just over a period of time, but, you know, there might be cycles in the day or cycles in the month, and it'll learn the more you feed data through it. So those kind of things. And also some of the speech ones. I guess the one thing I noticed there, that the containerized version, so where you can run it wherever you like, are now GA. So if you need to understand and or generate speech, you can do that containerized wherever it kind of needs to be. Oh, that was I talked about. And yeah, I talked about managed identities and private endpoints, so both kind of key. Yes, and I'll skip that. And lots of Azure ML things. So again, I'm not a data scientist, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around Azure machine learning. But I guess the thing I kind of picked up on is how now Azure Machine Learning over the years has kind of gone through iterations from sort of, a graphical version, which everyone loved, but data, it probably wasn't ideal for data scientists, through to a code-based one, which was great, but it was a little bit different. And now the way these things are being exposed via Jupyter notebooks and whatever, much more kind of standardized, familiar to people who work, data scientists who work with these things, and you can actually run these services in the tools you'd use, which as a developer, kind of cool. Again, COVID-19 related. So in the text analytics service, a whole lot of new features around medical text analytics, because obviously the medical world and the clinical world has a language all of its own that is not English. And these are, we're seeing models developed specifically around healthcare and understanding, what language is referring to a diagnosis versus something else. So that was really interesting. And there's a new version of the custom translator, which is basically compatible, but look, bar graphs, it is better. So that's really kind of handy. Okay, so that's the whirlwind AI and machine learning. Analytics, everyone's loving on the Synapse, kind of, I guess, the next gen analytics platform. Lots of good stuff. The things I picked up there in particular was, if I could find it, where'd it go? Oh, the Synapse link. So that's the ability to, dynamically hook into other data sources like Cosmos DB and actually do live analytics without having to import it and doing all those, kind of ingestion things you typically need to do, and lots of things in there I've noticed about speed and getting faster and doing all those kind of things. So that was kind of cool. A new flavor, and I don't know who's on the call, but I know even some of the customers I've been talking to are very excited by Photon, and being a Star Trek fan, I was hoping it was to do with torpedoes, but apparently not. Basically, it's kind of taking this Delta Lake approach to looking at streaming data, which has enormous performance improvements. So if you're into streaming data and things, that is definitely something to have a look at. Azure Data Factory. So this is if you want to think about it as your cloud-based ETL transformation and do everything Swiss Army knife product. Whole bunch of stuff around there. The things I picked up on there particularly is around coming in H2. So this is calendar year. So this should be sometime before Christmas, and I haven't checked in the last few weeks if it's been updated. But Data Factory being able to extend into and connect to things like I clicked it. My bad, I clicked it. Connect to Snowflake and other external data sources, just like it can with Cosmos DB or SQL. Oh, I know what I've done. Okay, that's right. Lots of things in this deck are hyperlinked, which is really convenient until you don't want to go somewhere when you click on it. Yeah. Come on, we've got to get to the good stuff. No. Doop. Wow, don't click on stuff, Todd. Okay. Yes, I will carefully mouse over. Yeah, so connections to things like Snowflake and the Delta Lake, which I just mentioned before, all those kind of things. So really extending the range of services that can connect to and do all sorts of things, because moving data and transforming data is what it's all about. So compute, this is probably of greater interest to me. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And again, you can see at Ignite, there's a whole lot of things that went GA, particularly around managed disks and new compute platforms and things like that. Oh no, I didn't highlight. Okay. There are a couple of interesting ones in here. So the dedicated host, which is as close as you'll get to bare metal in the cloud, was going preview. And I think I've got slides on this, but if anyone is fortunate enough to be using the Oracle's platform, WebLogic server on Azure went GA. So that's a dual supported, fully approved implementation. And in fact, I think I have, let me just go past there. Yeah, on Azure. So in terms of other compute services, Azure Functions, so PowerShell support in durable functions. So durable functions, if you haven't come across them, are sort of like a lightweight, because functions typically are serverless, very short-lived pieces of code, but sometimes you do need longer running or orchestrating across a few different functions, which is where durable functions come in. So think of them as kind of a lightweight, stateful orchestrator. But up until now, those didn't support PowerShell. So that's now in public preview. Also, it's kind of a weird one to have on this slide, but anyway, Azure Static Web Apps, which is a new service which is itself still in preview, now supports Blazor for Damien and those people who just can't get enough of the Blazor. As always, lots and lots of new compute families coming online. This one, I guess, is kind of important, the DV4, because it's effectively the new general purpose one. So this is probably what you'll go to, even if you're not using VMs in a lot of services like app service and things like that. You'll often be asked to pick a node size, and you'll see these numbers reflected in there. So it's basically just the, the newer family of Intel chips. And as these families come out, they tend to be, lower power for the amount of compute power it's putting out, and that kind of translates into lower cost. So you'll see that pop up a lot. The dedicated host I spoke about. That's if you really, really need low-level control and over the host that's running. It's still not the same as having dedicated tin, but it's as close as you can get. We'll talk about that. So, for example, one of the things that goes with those dedicated hosts is much, much more fine-grained control on the maintenance schedule. So, in a lot of Azure services, if you're, as you go up towards the PaaS, they'll get patched within a certain window, and you don't have a lot of control over that. If for some reason you do need really, really tight control for particular FSI reasons, or your application is particularly sensitive to mini outages, that gives you the ability to control that, control when Microsoft applies those underlying host patches. So that's part of that. I spoke about this, so WebLogic server on Azure. So that's an IaaS-based solution. So that's GA. So that's fully supported. You get that through Microsoft, but supported by Oracle. But the other one, which was potentially was also released in November though, is Oracle WebLogic, but running on top of Kubernetes. So rather than having to look after VMs, you can use things like AKS and now deploy Oracle WebLogic on top of that, which was, I thought, very interesting. Disk storage, lots and lots, disk just getting faster and faster. I think we're going to have a very serious problem soon when we run out of names to start calling these things. We have ultra, we have mega, we have super fast. We're gonna have to start having competitions. So I guess it's about having a range of choices, right? It's not just getting fast, but for example, these ultra disks, when you look at the IOPS, so 160,000 IOPS, which is, it sounds quite ridiculous, but when you get certain workloads, things like SAP HANA and things like that, we're very, very sensitive to latency on the disk, and they do lots and lots of things in disk or in memory. Those become super, super important. Yep. Okay. And this was kind of neat too. Again, probably potentially more of a legacy maintenance thing, but Azure Shared Disks went GA. So this is the ability to mount a single disk to multiple VMs and have them all writable. So, that a good scenario for that might be, you have an app that needs to write, servers in a farm that need to write to a file, a file share, for example. So you can do that, write that to multiple things, and then it doesn't matter which server the traffic ends up going to. SQL clustering, all those kind of scenarios. More of an IaaS scenario, but useful for helping with that. Oh, and yeah, this bit that it's supported both with the premium SSDs and even those mega ultra disks, so for your SAP clusters and all those kind of wonderful big things. Oh yeah, there you go. Sure, just support for SAP, all that kind of good stuff. These are kind of ruby. Yep, SAP HANA, 50% read write, blah blah blah. Yeah, so think clusters. That's kind of where it's going to be the most useful. Does also support though customer managed key encryption. So if you need to encrypt keys and you don't want to use the Microsoft keys, you can use your own. Super cool. Image builder service, again, not one I use a lot, but you know, if you need to build disk images, it's basically a pipeline and a tool to do that and manage that and integrate that into your Azure pipelines. So GA is expected around the end of this year. I didn't see an announcement, but I hadn't looked, to be honest. Again, for the infrastructure folks, the Azure VMware solution. So this is, if you're into that kind of thing, you can think of it as, you know, just basically you can get it as a service. And if you're operating it, you're just operating it just like you would with your normal vSphere and all those kind of things. So all very good. Okay, now we're getting somewhere cooler. So containers, because you know we've got to put everything in containers. Even Grogu has to go in a container. So, and I left this one in. I think this is important. So this is not so much a technical feature in AKS, but there's been a big investment over the last quarter because Kubernetes is awesome. It's also can be super complicated, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to get right, or probably even worse, to get wrong. So through all the customer engagements we've done and how we use it ourselves, you know, Microsoft have built up a fairly detailed library of best practices, not only general Kubernetes best practices, but also specifically for AKS and Azure. And they've now been collected and I guess published in a couple of ways. So there's documentation. So there's in the well-architected framework, there's AKS specific flavors, if you like, of how to build an app in a well-architected way in Azure. Very prescriptive guidance and checklists and things like that, as well as things like security baselines and all those kind of things. So it's I'll share this out later, but that's definitely worth checking out. In terms of features for Kubernetes, so Azure policy for AKS went GA. So up until recently, you provisioned your Kubernetes, your AKS, your Kubernetes cluster, and the resources that provided that cluster, you could see in Azure, like you could see the nodes, you could see the gateways, all those kind of things. But the actual, you know, the things inside that, the actual Kubernetes constructs, you had to go into the cluster to manage those. So there's a couple of things on this list which are really about changing that. So those internal parts, so, you know, pods, deployments, namespaces, all those Kubernetes concepts are now actually exist as Azure resources and are surfaced up in Azure, in the Azure dashboards and things. So what that means, so Azure policy, which you might use in Azure, for example, to define your governance rules in Azure. So for example, which data centers can you deploy to? What size services can you deploy? Are you allowed to have, you know, public IPs on your services? All those things you can define, and the platform will enforce for you. You can now apply policies like that to within your AKS cluster. So what are the rules around networking within your cluster, using the same policy constructs that you do in Azure? And similarly, role-based access control. So now you still have the choice, obviously, of using one of the open source frameworks within Kubernetes or supported by Kubernetes for doing that. But equally well, you can use a native Azure approach to defining who can do what, which nodes can call what nodes, all those kind of good stuff. Yeah. Oh, and similarly, yeah, that was the last one. That the identity used by the pods within the cluster can, it's in public preview, that those can now be managed as identities via Azure Active Directory. So lots of good stuff there, with just meaning you don't have to learn a whole other set of tool set if you're using Kubernetes. You can use what you're already familiar with in Azure. And I kind of talk about that. So Kubernetes resource view. So you can go in now. So when you go into your portal, you will see you can actually see your resources. You don't need to go into the Kubernetes cluster and things like that. And this is one I've been waiting for a while. I think it's still in public preview, but you can now go in and just stop your cluster. You don't need to destroy it, which is, especially in development type scenarios or DR scenarios, that saves you redeploying it. And that obviously only applies to the worker nodes, because in AKS you don't pay for the management, the API nodes anyway. And and this was, I don't know, we have. Oh, don't tell me I clicked on a thing again. No, good. Do we have anyone who's a Kubernetes AKS person? If we do, was it this week or last week? I think it was one Mandalorian episode ago. Kubernetes themselves announced that they were switching from their underlying the container runtime being Docker to being Containerd, which caused no certain amount of confusion and angst in the community, but it doesn't matter. They're compatible with Docker containers. There's a few reasons for it, but AKS now does the same. You won't notice any difference. You still can build your containers with Docker and deploy them because they follow the Open Container Interface spec, but that's just something to note under the hood. What do we got here? Oh, and the new version of Kubernetes 1.19 will be GA sometime around the end of this year. Typically, AKS supports 3 versions, so the current version, the previous version, and until it supports. Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, Azure Resource Health. So again, just like you do when you go into any other Azure resource, now you'll see all the pods and nodes and all those kind of things light up in your Azure dashboards to show the health and metrics and all those kind of good things. And there's a new version of CADA, which is the framework Microsoft have released that within your Kubernetes cluster allows you to deploy serverless things like Azure Functions. There's just a new version of that, which is of interest. So that was containers. Let me pause, to have a quick drink, and also just check before we go on to these databases and we stare at Moz a little bit, if there's any questions, or does that make sense? Is anyone awake?
Awake, yes.
Oh, good, 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 good.
No questions in the chat at the moment, but if anybody wants to ask something and come off mute.
I do have some demos later, I promise. I'm just trying to get through some of this. Up to 40 minutes, yeah. I said, yeah, there's a lot. Okay. So looking at databases. So we kind of spoke about before. So again, bearing in mind September was the Ignite conference, so lots of announcements there. This Synapse link, which is that ability for Synapse to reach into Cosmos DB and pull data out for analytics without it having to be kind of a batch process as you would typically be. There was some interesting ones around, and again, depending on whether you use them, but around SQL DB, there was a lot of different things. So for example, and in fact, let me go forward because, oh, look, I did highlight it. Here's was the kind of ones I picked up on. So it's a little older now, but Cosmos DB having a serverless pricing model. So rather than the standard Cosmos DB where you actually say, I need this much capacity, you can now provision it and say a serverless model. So it's just whatever the traffic gets, it'll, a bit like Azure Functions or Logic Apps or those kind of things. You just pay for what you use, which is super useful if you've got either low volume things, or maybe when you're ramping, when you're starting out, it might be low volume, but it's going to get bigger over time. So you can start with that. So that can help reduce the initial costs. Public preview, so SQL DB long-term backup retention. So that was one of the things that would offered. Now you could always do this, right, by extending, by copying the backups yourself from that Azure maintained for whatever it was, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days a year. But now that's built in for up to 10 years of retention if you want to use that. And one of my favorite little things, Azure SQL Edge. This is cool. So this is a package of SQL Server specifically designed to run in Edge scenarios. So it's reasonably small footprint, so 500 meg, runs in a container, but has all the kind of functionality you'll want, to use in an edge scenario. So things like, time series insights and all those kind of things, machine learning and all the kind of things you might want to do on the edge. Yeah, there's more stuff there. So, oh, look, I've talked about this. Yep. So Provis, we talk about
We have a question from Ray. I think it's a question about the SQL point in time.
Yep.
Did you want to ask it, Ray?
Just want to know a little bit more detail. Was it just for managed instances? Was it that you can basically get a?
Yeah, for this, yeah. For at the moment, the numbers it showed there, wherever it was, blah, blah, blah. There it is coming for the other one too, but the timeline is different. Okay. So yeah, so there's kind of, I guess, two parallel things there. One is around long-term retention, and the other is around point in time. Because SQL DB has had that for quite a while, right? The point in time restore, that was one of the great values, whereas managed instance didn't have that. So that's now coming across into SQL MI. So, but when we're looking at a preview in Q1, so in the first quarter next calendar year for SQL MI. Those other databases, so the open source databases, MySQL and Postgres, obviously they're available along with MariaDB as fully managed PaaS services on Azure. But this flexible server is kind of new. Again, it's about how much control you have over when things happen. So this new flexible server option is about controlling when updates are done, all those kind of things. I think there's kind of two use cases I see a lot for people using these sort of things. It's like small open source projects, or they might be using it for things like WordPress sites and things like that, where that sort of thing isn't that important. But equally well, a lot of people are using Postgres particularly as a migration path off of, say, Oracle. So they're actually running very large enterprise scale apps. So they need more control than probably they had before, when it was sort of targeted more at smaller workloads. So that relates to things like being able to define custom maintenance windows, being able to introducing support for zones in Azure where they're available, so that you can get from 99.99 to 99.999, all those kind of things. So lots of movement there. And I spoke about SQL Edge. So it is a small footprint for SQL, but it's immensely powerful. And IoT scenarios or edge scenarios are the most logical fit for it. But yeah, really able to do that and deploy it. Okay, so SQL, Azure SQL Database. So this is the multi-tenant single database, so the original kind of SQL database, not MI. So a couple of things that should already in public preview: locally redundant and zone redundant storage for the backups. This is particularly important because I know I've had customers where, if you're running an app in two regions, it might be Australia East and Southeast, you can just replicate the data and that's all fine. But we did have other customers who they weren't running two instances in Australia. So they had the primary running in Australia, but for some reason they might have the secondary running in Singapore or somewhere else. And that was fine from a compute point of view, but they didn't want the backups to be leaving Australia. So this is about the ability you can just rely on, you can now configure locally redundant storage so that it doesn't leave the country, but you can leverage the new zones that are in Australia East, so you have zone redundant storage. So again, increases your nines from whatever it is the storage is already, whatever it is, 11 nines. This takes it to 12 nines, because you always need that last 9. So just some more options there. And then down here, we talked about long-term storage back for SQL Managed, public preview, Q4. So I didn't notice if that's come out yet already, but it should be anytime soon. So that's the 10-year kind of storage for backups. And then this is another one that people have been waiting on, again, for both for SQL Database and managed instance, being able to set maintenance windows. Because by default, we patch, the underlying services. Now, bear in mind that things like SQL Database aren't a SQL server running on a VM, right? This is a microservice architecture, super redundant anyway. But if something may impact your workload, they were already scheduled out of hours. Of course, where Microsoft, so out of hours was Redmond time out of hours, which probably wasn't Australian time out of hours. So this is coming is the ability to define what out of hours means for you, and then those will be applied. Point in time restore we spoke about, which uses the LRS and ZRS. Azure Cache for Redis. Oh yeah, so private link being available for the Azure Redis service. So it basically just means that you can access that service even though it's not the service itself isn't within your VNet. You can connect to it over a private IP address, which a lot of people do request. And there's some super new Visual Studio Code extensions. And this is also important for a lot of people. So I think this is available in preview now. So basically, basically adding an extra tier. So from a Redis product point of view, you can now actually access the full Redis enterprise offering, which has a whole lot more options and tier and sizings and all those kind of things than the standard one. And supporting zone redundancy and upgrading to version 6. Super exciting. Just mindful of time. Oh, and again, you'll be detecting a bit of a theme here with zone redundancy, right? So Azure SQL Database, again, being offered with zone redundant storage. Sorry, in a zone redundant way. I do find people get super excited about the zones, but really important just to clarify or to understand that the zones are not DR. They're about increasing HA in the Azure strategy. So because the zones are, they're, for example, in Sydney, if there's 3, 4, however many zones there are, they're still in Sydney. So they're still within, a couple of milliseconds from each other, which is, you can imagine what that is in distance, 10-ish kilometers, that kind of range. But from our point of view, we still consider that HA because, if a big climatic event happens, a big storm floods the whole Sydney basin, that's still likely to impact all those things. So for DR, so in effect, and you'll see if you go and look at the services, the zone redundant version will usually be 1 more 9 or half a 9 more than the non-zone one, right? So if it's 11 9s for SQL, it'll be 12 9s for that. Or if it's 99.9 for something, it'll be 99.95 or 99.95 to 99.99. So it is increased redundancy, but it is because what you have deployed in one Azure region is already highly redundant across different infrastructure and redundant power supplies and links and all those kind of good things. Yep. Again, fairly special use case, but there are people who do need this. So things like Azure SQL Database, obviously it's encrypted in rest. The data's encrypted at rest. It's encrypted in transit. But when it's actually in the compute, when it's actually going around the CPU and whatever, obviously it's by default it's not encrypted because the computer needs to actually understand it and whatever. But we're rolling out, should be this month, is the ETA. ETA always usually means probably, most likely, but the ability to have SQL databases that leverage secure enclaves. So actually within the CPU and on the compute, it actually uses all the silicon protection there, the Intel, what is it? Yeah, the SGX secure enclaves. So actually within the chip and within the silicon, things are protected and isolated and encrypted and all those kind of good things. So if you need that level of security, that is coming. We kind of spoke about that. And if you're using hyperscale, so the super big SQL, that's ETA for next year to be able to geo-replicate that, just like you can with the smaller ones. And we kind of spoke about the Facebook. Oh, this is an interesting one. So one of the things that people had to adjust to, so when SQL DB first came out, one of the key things we used to talk about that you didn't get, we used to say two things. One, that it's a database. It's a single database, not a database server. And one of the other things you didn't get with that was SQL agent. So we're introducing in, so you could do that in other ways, right? You could do that with other forms of automation to do those periodic tasks. But coming out early next year, there'll be a logically equivalent version of the SQL agent. So a way to automate management tasks and all those kind of things, which are probably more familiar to database and DBAs than some of the other options in Azure. Super cool. All right. Is anyone else picking up on the Baby Yoda theme? I don't know why we need an avocado that looks like Baby Yoda, but we clearly do. So this one, we're getting close to when I can actually do some demos. So don't worry, we're nearly getting there. We're nearly getting there. So Azure DevOps, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There was just a couple I wanted to call out because these are things people have asked me a lot about. So this one down here, I particularly want to call out. So one of the challenges with Azure DevOps is there wasn't really a way to stop people in your organization creating DevOps organizations. You could create as many as you liked. And so it was quite common to see a lot of sprawl where each department created their own organization. So that you can now restrict that. That's in GA in your Azure AD so that people can't do that if you don't want them to. The other interesting one, which is kind of almost like the reverse of that, is you can now have it so you can pay for a user and identify that user, and that gives them rights across multiple DevOps organizations. So almost kind of the reverse thing, because some people want to have different organizations, and that's fine. And on a similar theme, the ability to reference repos in other organizations is also GA. So lots of little stuff like that. Okay, so moving on to hybrid. So I'll just flip through this because I know I can't afford one of these. I'd like one of these. I can't afford one of these. But some new options in the Azure Appliance family, if you like. So Azure Stack Hub, which is the kind of roll it in big data center version of Azure, now can be purchased with GPUs on board. So obviously, if you're doing lots of AI or rendering or those kind of things, those are immensely useful. Different types of GPUs depending on what workloads you're doing, whether it's AI or more graphics related, you can do that. Kind of getting next smaller down, the Azure Stack Edge, which is kind of the one. It's probably 2 RU. Does it say? I don't know. Looks right. Ray, what is that? Is that 1? You think that's 1 RU?
It looked 1 to me.
Yeah, okay, 1 RU that you can stack into your data center or closer to the edge type thing. Similarly, that can also now come with GPUs, which is particularly the T4s, which are more around AI ML than they are visualization. So if you're doing AI workloads on the edge, that's pretty cool. These are the cool ones. These are ones I really want. So I've seen these in real life. So the Stack Edge Pro R, and I'm guessing the R stands for rugged. So where I've seen these, so think for example, so in America, was it 2 years ago when they had a whole lot of hurricanes and things? Microsoft had a whole lot of SUVs built, which had these things in the back, and then they had all sorts of cameras on the roof and GPS and whatever. And you could literally drive them into the disaster zones, and they were kind of like your mobile command centers collecting all the data. Probably no Azure connection because the infrastructure had been taken out. But as soon as the vehicle was back with connectivity, that could all feed back up. So you could also think like on a mining site. This might be on a truck, that kind of thing. That's what kind of that's for. Do the workloads, and even smaller, the Mini. So the scenario for this is more like, again, think a disaster management or a remote field type thing, but this thing can basically fit in a backpack. So you can have people with this in a backpack who are going around doing things, and again, running all sorts of different Azure services, and then all connect and whatever. So that's now GA. And if anyone wants to buy me one, I'd be super happy. Just to call this out too. So in terms of the services that are supported on these devices, it's not all the Azure services. Some just won't work. Some just aren't there yet. The ones that are coming that I thought were particularly interesting. So obviously IoT Hub is a pretty important one. But equally well, things like Event Hub, Container Registry, and AKS. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? Where you want containerized workloads on those kind of devices. And they're all kind of coming over the next quarter-ish. All right. Now to keep Dan happy, let's talk about integration and knee rockets. I mean, not knee rockets, integration. And I'll actually show you some honest to goodness real stuff here because I've been dying to show it. This is, I've been promising Scott I would show him this stuff forever. Before we do, let's have a look at the big picture. Did I highlight some stuff? Yes, okay. So I think we've probably spoken about this. Most people are across it, but Azure Logic Apps, which is our serverless workflow and orchestration service, up until now has not been available outside of Azure, and that was because of the way it was written. The runtime has been completely rewritten so that it now runs on top of the Azure Functions runtime. And the Azure Functions runtime runs pretty much anywhere. So it'll run in a container, it'll run on a VM, it'll run on your laptop, it'll run anywhere. So because of that, we now have a whole lot of new options around Logic Apps, which I'll jump in and I'll show you in a sec. The other thing worth noting, and I didn't make it to last month's session. Did we have someone present on this? I'm not sure, but Azure API management. One of the powerful things, I guess, in Azure API management is the ability to define policies on requests. So that can be everything from rate limiting to transformation to caching to URL rewriting, all sorts of things you can do to do things and check things to requests on the way through the gateway, which was great. But when things weren't working, it was kind of tricky to try and figure out why and what happened. You can now basically do a live debug on that. So you can connect, and I'll show you how you can do that in a sec. But basically you can, from your Visual Studio Code, say, okay, connect, run this in debug mode, it'll deploy it. You call their API, you can literally step through those policies as they execute to see what's going on, which is very cool. Anyone, and I'm desperately trying to find more time to wrap my head and get experience with Dapper, the distributed application runtime. But in public preview now, Azure API management has support to expose services deployed in Dapper natively through Azure API management. And I thought there was another one about that. Oh, there was another Dapper thing. Okay. Is it not here? No. Okay, that's okay. Azure, I'll show you this too. This is kind of interesting. You may not notice this, but public Azure Logic Apps automation hubs. So no, park that. I'll just show you what that is in a sec. And Service Bus is finally getting larger messages, which I know Dan will be happy about because, he likes to send around his 100 meg messages and, pollute the world. You bet. So I don't think I'll even talk about this. I'll just show you the real life. Okay, let's switch over. Show the real thing. So what I've got, hopefully still here. So in Visual Studio Code, one thing to note. So this Azure Logic Apps. So at the moment, we now have 2 versions of Logic Apps that exist in Azure. There's the current one, which is what you do if you go into Azure or create a Logic app. That's called Azure Logic Apps. There's also Logic Apps Preview, right? And at an Azure level, these are different resources because they're actually built on a different runtime. So to do what I'm going to show you, when you install extensions and things or look in Azure Portal, make sure you're looking for the preview, the thing with the preview next to it, or like me, you'll get very confused for 10 minutes going, why is this not working? And the idea of this, if I come down here, see I have in this Logic Apps preview. So here is my Logic app. So here's where you notice the first thing that's different And in fact, let me jump over to the Azure portal for a sec and show you. So if I go to Logic Apps, so this is not the preview. These are the current GA Logic Apps. When you create a Logic app, you create it only has one workflow in each Logic app, right? So if I come in here, here's my Logic apps, and if I go into this Logic app, I can go to the designer and I do my thing, right? One of the other differences, whereas if you create, for example, a function app, when you create a function app, you can create multiple functions within it. And because we've now moved to the functions runtime, the same thing applies for Logic apps. So when you see this in here, let me show you. Instead of being just one workflow within a Logic app is a project with a collection of related workflows. That makes sense. So if I jump back here, so in my project over here, here is my 2-wit local demo 1 is my project, and within that I have workflows, one or more. So this is really handy for, if you build a way of bundling related things together, I guess. So I've only got one, but you can see here it'll have multiple. So if I jump over here, and let's say I want to add a new workflow to this one, you can see up here I've got create a new project. So that would be a whole new thing, which I don't want to do, but I just want to add a workflow. And then I get to choose, what do you want? Do you want stateful or stateless? So by default, Logic apps are stateful. So they store the state of every step and every stage and every field, which is really handy because you can go in and see what they are. You can go back and see the full run history of all those things. But it means you need to store that information. And so we've added the option to do stateless workflows, which basically don't store all that things. So for example, if you might have a workflow which is not doing any business critical thing that you need to audit, but it might be some XML transformation or something, I don't know. It's just a utility workflow, if you like. So you don't necessarily need to store all the state. So you can do it as a stateless one and it'll run much, much faster. But for now, I'm going to create a stateful one, and I probably should have turned the lights on in my room before I started this demo. It's gotten darker since we started. Let me give you some backlight. I'm very excited and creative, so I'm going to call this workflow demo 2. Okay, so here's our little workflow. So if I jump over to my project files now, so here's my project. You can see I've got my host, my connections, all my kind of standard stuff, but then I have a folder here for each of the workflows that I've created. Okay, so here is my demo 2 workflow, which is looking decidedly empty at the moment. Now, this is what you used to be able to do. You used to be able to come in here in Visual Studio Code and edit the JSON, and it was super exciting because we all love writing JSON. But we kind of didn't get that nice experience we had wherever we are here, where we came in here and got the nice designer and dragged and drop and did all that kind of stuff. Well, no more. So if let me get rid of that one. And what I'll do, I'll use this one in the interest of time that I created earlier. You can see it's got a bunch more stuff, but I don't want to edit the code. That's just not how I am. I can come in here and I can say open in designer. Ooh, okay, so what that's going to do in the background is spin up it's using here both the, not only the functions runtime, but it's using the Azure storage emulator, which it's going to use because I've selected the stateful workflow. So it's going to use that to persist all the stuff while it's running locally here. So now you can see here I am in VS Code and I've got my nice GUI designer. But what you might also notice is it looks different than it used to look. So these boxes in the current version are much, much bigger, having a lot more information in them, which is great. But as you build more complex workflows, it gets really hard to kind of keep the bigger picture of your workflow. So this designer has been redesigned. Designer's been redesigned. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. So what you get is this kind of quite small looking boxes, and then when you click on it, lo and behold, let me move this a bit. You get this little pop-out thing with all the other kind of things, right? So that way it keeps this clear. You can kind of see where you are as you go around these things. Okay, so what I've got here is a really simple workflow. It's going to be triggered by HTTP. And when we get it, I'm going to send myself an email. And to make my life easier for the demo, I'm going to, oh, did I spell my name right? It's very important I spell my name right. I'm going to send it to that account. Let's go Grogu. And you get bonus points if you understand why I said go Grogu. That's really how to say go Grogu. You know, you could add, you know, do all the normal sort of things you would do in a Logic app, add an action, do all those kind of things. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so all the normal sort of things, but you're getting that same graphic experience. I'm going to do that. So that's, oh, hang on, let me check I did do that. Did I do that? Todd, T, what did I? Okay, good. Save. Oh no, what did it do? Encountered error, of course you did. Well, that's okay, it's valid for, oh, I haven't authorized it to do that. Okay. Actually, no, that should work. Why didn't that work? Hang on. This is the part of the developer cycle where everyone goes, I hate being a developer. I think, oh, I wonder if it kind of half created that thing I did before. Let me just close this for a sec. So if I go and have a look in here, so here's the workflow. So everything I'm doing in the GUI is, you know, it's just a JSON file in the background. I just don't want to write one. Go Grogu, do whatever, that looks okay. Okay. And then I want to test this workflow. I can do very complicated start debugging. Let's see if it works. Oh, let me make this bigger so you can see what it's doing here. And I've got to say, we've done a lot of cool things this year, and we've done something atrocious. Does anyone run the Azure Functions runtime before? Remember what it used to have at the start whenever you ran it? Beautiful ASCII art. It's gone. They took it out. I may never speak to that team again. Okay, so it's restoring, it's doing all sorts of things, it's building, it's doing good stuff. Now what we're going to do, because this is just a HTTP endpoint, and you'll even see, I'm hoping everyone can see on the monitor, if you have a look down in the little status bar here, you can see what it's attached to, you can see it's doing all those good things, it's building. I probably should have built this before, but that's okay. And you can see it's actually going to just end up being a .NET Core DLL. That's how it's all going to be compiled, and that's going to run on top of the functions runtime, which is running locally. Okay, or it's not. Okay, no, I don't know why that's not working. That's okay. So what we would do then, if we wanted to run it, terminal. Oh, there we go. First start. Is we would come into the overview, this little overview tab. And remember I said it's storing all the, I don't think my storage emulator is running. I think that's my problem. Okay. Yep, demo gods are not kind. I think what's happened is the Azure storage emulator is not running for some reason. What you should get here is the full run history, just like you would in Azure. It will give you, and why didn't I get a screenshot of this one? I did it earlier today. It will give you a URL that you can hit, the local URL. And the way I was testing, I was just using the REST client API extension, which you can just cut and paste that nice little, the URL it gives you, which looks like this, localhost, blah, 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 manual, goes across. It's got all those nice things, and it's got a key just like it would. And you could go, this is not going to work, but you can go send a request. And that's how you can test these things. So you can actually just call that Logic app directly, and it will run. And yes, something's gone horribly wrong. Oh no, came back 200. Okay, good, good, good. So I don't know if maybe it is running and it's just trying to confuse me to death. I don't know. Let me run that up while I'm doing. But anyway, you get the idea. That's how it should work. Obviously, I didn't sacrifice a chicken at the right time or something. And oh, the other thing I was going to show you, where is VS Code? Come back. is under, oh, nope, not under that, not under that, under here. Oh, and then if I wanted to publish that, obviously I could, it comes with Docker files and everything. Just to build that into a Docker file, I could deploy it. I could come in here and publish that to Azure. API management, here we go. So the other thing I did talk about was, oh, don't tell me I've deleted that. Oh, no, keep going. Keep going. Yeah, so literally, so here is an API management I've got running. It needs to be the developer tier, one track for young players. And the developers supports debugging, which makes sense, I guess. I would come down to an operation. Here's the get one. I don't know if I have anything defined in the policy. I would define my policies here, and literally to debug it, I would go right click and go start debugging policy. And that would connect to it and do all the debugging things. So then you can do, if you're into API management, that's super handy. Scott, that's something you can enjoy. All right, jumping back. So the other thing I wanted to quickly show you. Oh, so I've published, and then here's that where I have published that before, because just to prove that Todd doesn't lie. If I come in now in the Azure portal, and I can again go into the designer, you'll see it looks exactly the same with this kind of, oh, let me get rid of him for a minute, this sort of abbreviated view, which you can imagine if you've got branching things and all sorts of things, this becomes really handy. And then when you click here, this little thing pops out. So the design experience you're seeing here is exactly the same as what you see inside VS Code. Does not change, it's exactly the same. Very, very handy. Cool, okay. Let me jump back because I realize we've been going for a super long time. Come back to Grogu. We spoke about that. Yes, we spoke about that. I manage certificates coming. Don't care. Yep. API management is also going to get support for availability zones. Should be in preview now. And Arc enabled. I know Damien's loving his Azure Arc enabled API management in public preview this month. So that's basically, yeah, when you're running API management outside of Azure, you can still use the Azure stuff. And Dan gets his big messages up to 100. What is it, Dan? What is it currently? 1 megabyte? Is that what it still is?
I think it is, but the premium has a larger size. I know.
Larger size, yeah, standard. Okay, so yeah, we're going from 1 megabyte to 100 megabytes. I think if you're going over 100 megabytes, you really need to rethink what messaging is. That's a large message.
That's right.
But anyway, it will support that. And JMS for all our Java friends, all super cool. Okay, lots of cool things happening in IoT. I'll just go through them because not always a lot of people. So Azure Maps has got some great new stuff. Turn-by-turn navigation support in Android, which is nice. This is actually more the one I would like. So weather service. So now when you use the Azure Maps services as a developer, for example, severe weather alerts and all those kind of things can be accessed through the API. So you can do lots and lots of cool things in your apps, which is very, very handy. This is big. So in IoT Edge scenarios, support for nested IoT Edge. So that's, you know, this idea of leaf nodes, if you like. So an IoT Edge, which is in front of a whole lot of other IoT edges, which is in a whole lot of other IoT edges. This kind of nested structure. And this is important because particularly in industrial type scenarios, they often have network, you know, physically separate network segmentation and very tight control over what can go between networks. So using this, you could have an IoT edge in the IT network, which has limited access to the other networks, and then they look after the edge node devices. So this is very cool. And this is also, I haven't got it on here, but this is also supported in IoT Central now as well. So that's very cool for people doing that. Azure Sphere is awesome. Main thing here is a new version, the GA of the OS and things like that. There is a new dev kit, which I haven't got my camera switched on, or I'd show you. That looks very cool. So lots of good things happening in Azure Sphere. Azure Digital Twins is estimated to be going GA any day now, if it hasn't already. So Azure Digital Twins is basically the ability to model real worlds and people and things in space. So if you think of smart buildings, you can model, your rooms, who's in your rooms, what equipment's in your rooms, what the temperature is, and you can define those models using a definition language and connect those up. So that is super awesome. I can't wait for that to go GA. Event Grid, do love Event Grid. Event Grid support for Kubernetes as a publisher, which is very, very cool. So when things happen in your Kubernetes cluster, think pod gets created, something's unhealthy, all those type of things will get raised as event in Event Grid. And the other one that's really interesting is this idea of partner events. So obviously at the moment, all the Microsoft, the Azure platform raises events to Event Grid. You can have your own custom events. So that's your business domain events. But this idea of partner events. So think third-party services like, I think the first one is Auth0, for example. So, if you're using SaaS providers, like could be Salesforce or anything like that, are going to publish events to Azure Event Grid that you can subscribe to. So if someone, a new account or a failed authorization, for example, happens, then you can subscribe to that and that'll get pushed into your Event Grid as well. So lots of partners coming on board. But yeah, as I said, I think Auth0 is the first one that's the kind of launch partner. Now getting into the whole management thing. We're nearly done. Don't worry about that list of lists. I've left some out. We kind of did speak about this. So governance. So this idea of Azure policies, which are core to governing Azure, but being able to deploy those to AK or to use those to manage resources within AKS. I do like this heading. Services are in public preview or GA currently. That's very helpful. Yes, the one I care about there is in public preview at the moment. Oh, that does remind me, I did forget. The 20 slides ago, when I talked about SQL Edge, which I really like, did want to call out that does run on ARM64. So you can literally run that on a Raspberry Pi or a Nano or whatever you want to, Jetson or whatever. It does run on ARM as well as x86. Just occurred to me. Lots of good backup stuff. I know Ray likes his backups. So Azure Backup for SAP HANA, that's a big backup. I've done a few SAP implementations on Azure, and I know how big these backups are. But that's now and supported. And with things like SAP, it isn't so much about the fact that it works technically. Like these things have worked technically for years, but that doesn't mean they're certified by SAP, right? That certification process is very, very long and involved. So that has now happened. So that is now certified. So you now have a certified native backup solution for your rather large SAP HANA databases. That is now GA. Azure File Share also now has backup, and it's built right into the blade, which is kind of cool. If you're using Azure File Shares, you can do that. Bit of a theme here. Azure Backup for SQL Server, again, now integration right into the blade, so you can control it from one place without having to flip between a whole lot of places. Now, this one, yeah, so I don't do a lot of VMs, I'll be honest, but when you can, if you're restoring from Azure Backup, you can now replace existing disks with the backup, so you kind of don't need to provision a new one and then swap it over. It can replace the existing disks during the flow. So it's like a one-step thing, which I'm imagining makes people's lives an awful lot easy. Azure Advisor. Oh yeah, so Azure Advisor has been updated. The thing I like about Azure Advisor, it's a bit like Security Center now. It's all gamified, so it gives you the advice it's giving you is each bit of advice has a score. So the kind of the larger impact or the better off you'll be by taking action on it gives it a higher score. So that it makes it really easy to kind of sort out of the 1,000 recommendations, which are the ones I actually want to work through. So just like Azure Security Center does, that same sort of idea, everything from cost optimization to configuration is all kind of gamified. This is interesting. So Azure Cost Management, which obviously, it's built into the Azure portal, but you can now, for example, connect that up and connect that if you have an AWS environment and do the same kind of billing and cost management type approach for your Azure and your AWS environments. So if you have multi-cloud, that's kind of handy. You can just do it in one thing. The ability to encrypt Azure Backup using customer managed keys. Please don't lose your keys because we can't help you. But for some people, that's, depending on what you're doing, that's a requirement. So just doing that. We've kind of spoken about zones a lot over the course. So here, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming. I kind of called out the ones that I think are important in my own biased way. So things like app service, API management, Key Vault, Functions, Logic Apps, and IoT Hub are all coming either by Christmas or in 2021 across the time. So if you are interested in those services, you can have a look at when they're coming available. And networking. I always try and avoid networking, but it always just follows me anyway. So Azure Firewall Manager went GA in August. So that's not Azure Firewall. This is Azure Firewall Manager. So the ability to centrally define policies and then push them out to multiple Azure firewalls rather than have to go out and manage them individually. And there's a bunch of new stuff coming there. See, this is where Shannon should be here, but things like split routing and all sorts of other things you can do that I try and avoid wherever I can. This is handy for, I think, most people. So the Azure Load Balancer, up until recently, only could load balance within an Azure region, like Australia East. Azure Load Balancer can now balance across regions. So if you just need a super simple layer 4 load balancer, you can use Azure Load Balancer for that. You don't need to go up to Azure Front Door or whatever. Obviously, those services do other things as well. But if you just need super simple load balancing across regions, you can now, it's in preview for that with that. And here's one for Damien, because I know he loves his space. Azure Orbital. I definitely want one of these. So Azure Orbital, ground station as a service. Yes, a GSAS, as we say in the biz. Hey? So this is basically, and I think for those that were on before, Damien was talking. Damien, do you want to talk about this one? You're very excited by this one. You love all things space, right?
This is awesome. So
it is awesome.
So now that we've got the remote Azure, is it in that diagram? So you can buy.
I think this is supposed to represent that. I think this bit here.
Is it? So they come in like shipping containers, and you can drop them in like deserts and Antarctic and all that sort of stuff. And so you can drop these Azure data centers, and now that Azure data centers, they can connect up to Azure Orbital. So Azure has leased a certain amount of, not quite the Scotland underwater one. Similar, like definitely along the same thing, but these new ones that they've recently released, absolutely similar concept. So the new ones they've released are about dropping these sort of shipping container data centers if you need that much. So it's a little bit more than that hard drive sort of one that you want, Todd. So you might have to pay a little bit more.
I'm not greedy, mate. I'm not greedy.
So a data center would do, like a shipping container would be fine for you as well. But you can hook them up to a whole bunch of satellite providers now. I've got a bent for SpaceX, but there's a whole bunch of other satellite providers that Azure's hooking into to provide network connectivity for their portable data centers anywhere in the world. So that's pretty cool. So it's sort of like just opens the box a lot on compute, where you can put it, connectivity, where you can do it. I wish it was as cool as Xbox. It's probably not as cool as Xbox, but yeah.
But yeah, so effectively, what this really is a partnership and kind of a turnkey as a service, right? So there's, as you can see at the bottom here, lots of different satellite providers, and obviously have their services. But then we then provide you know, basically out of the box, there's a whole bunch of Azure services. You need to connect that in. There's standards and whatever, which you can then connect in. So we can provide all of that. So who would care about this stuff? So think mining companies, think anyone who's remote and needs connectivity through that kind of approach. Could be a research station. It could be it could be a disaster scenario where you want to have, you want to activate something in case of a disaster. So Queensland government might, for example, could use it if, Brisbane City flooded again and all the data centers were underwater. This could be the kind of thing you drop an Azure data, I can't remember what they're called now, but the big shipping container with Azure stuff in it, connect it up to Azure Orbital and away you go. So anyway, super cool to see how, I guess, we're trying to, all these Azure services are great, but then when you partner with these other people who do these great things like satellite services or whatever, it opens up some really interesting scenarios. Okay, flipping through now, we're really far behind. So Azure Firewall Premium is of interest to our networking friends, I guess. The big thing, obviously, I spotted here was that, for the first time, it really is starting to introduce, intrusion detection, all that kind of thing, stateful packet inspection, all that kind of good stuff that people like for security, is starting to enter into Azure Firewall via the Azure Firewall Premium tier. So lots of good stuff happening there. Yes, we've spoken. Azure Security Center. Oh, the one thing, so this is, don't really want to go into detail here, but hopefully everyone's familiar with Azure Security Center. So it's a service built into Azure. A whole bunch of it is free, but it monitors your environments based on our best practices and machine learning models we've developed. We'll look at your environment and raise up security issues, which is great in Azure. But what we're seeing now is that same set of functionality being pushed to the edge. So, for example, and I think I got a slide on this, but for IoT, there is Azure Security Center for IoT. So it's like you run on the edge and again do those kind of best practice as well as continuously monitoring those kind of things at the edge. So yeah, very good to see that kind of spreading out. Yes, it's got a new dashboard, not super extending. So Azure Defender has a new dashboard as well. Cool thing, again, Azure, Damien spoke about Azure Arc. I know he's excited, but as more and more services can run outside of the Azure data center, it's really important that these kind of security services that are running under the hood also follow the workloads out to the data center. So, it can protect both server and containers, very, very important. And multi-cloud, so you can use those same services across Google, AWS, whoever else comes along. Going to skip that. And this was a big one for me. So part of that security new functionality was that container image scanning. So this is really important at two phases. When you actually ship your app, so when you build it and deploy a container, you want to know that, for example, the open source libraries you're using don't have known vulnerabilities and all those, and the configuration is fine, all that kind of stuff. You want to know when you ship it, but the problem is, of course, that might happen and everything's good today, but a vulnerability is discovered tomorrow. What do you do then? So that's where the container image can also scan at runtime. So that gives you both the shipping protection as well as continually monitoring the containers so that if things are discovered down the track, you're still protected. So that's really good because previously you had to kind of use a whole lot of open source tooling and it took a bit of knowledge to know how to set that up. I'll kind of talk about that. Similarly, AKS is leveraging those services to provide a whole lot of runtime protection. So there are other open source and commercial tools to do this. Those can still work. But I guess what we've seen in public preview now is Azure native services have that stuff baked right into AKS. And again, can be managed by policy. Super good. Equally well, that same thing now applying to SQL. So we're seeing this apply not only to SQL in Azure, but if you're using Azure Arc enabled SQL servers, the same thing can happen there, which is new. And kind of the same thing for IoT, right? I've forgotten the name of the company, which is really bad. CyberX. So we acquired a company called CyberX, which was a specialist in IoT, detecting IoT security vulnerabilities. And then that is now being baked right into IoT security detection and does all that kind of thing, and obviously integrates with Sentinel and all those other kind of good things. Sentinel itself, which is the sort of the Azure cloud-based SIEM, has got a whole lot of great new features, including behavior analytics. And I thought this was interesting too, connecting in and actually looking at data from Teams, O365, and other things. So I guess that idea of, what you would normally use to protect your infrastructure environments can also be used to protect your Microsoft SaaS offerings. Voice is running out. We kind of spoke about all that. Azure Defender for IoT, yeah, CyberX. There you go. That's what I said. So yeah, so that'll actually that will actually run in your environment, in your IT and OT network, and monitor for threats, do packet inspection, but also look at patterns and do all those kind of things, and then surface those alerts up so that you have a back into your unified dashboard. All good, you can take action on it. We're nearly there. Some cool stuff, probably most people have seen this, but block blobs now support versioning, which is kind of handy. You can use versioning. Encryption scopes. So previously you kind of had to, on the account level, decide what encryption, like did you want it to be, do you want to use it Microsoft keys, customer keys, or whatever? You can now do that down at things like container levels or blob levels. So you might have different policies. There might be different types of files in blobs in an account, and you might have different rules for different things. You can do that. Yeah, as they say there, all very good. And there's also some new things. So there's different ways to secure things in storage, either using key, shared access signatures, or Azure AD. You can now, through a policy, configure that so you can enforce it to use something like Azure AD and managed service identities if that's what you want to do. It just prevents any of the others being allowed. So that's often handy. Soft deletes at a container level. So if you delete it and you do a whoopsie, it's only a soft delete. So you can allow for that so that you can recover it up to a certain period of time, which you configure up to 1 year, after which it'll be really gone. But you can configure that as you to do whatever you want. Lifecycle management. So I thought this was interesting. So actually keeping an audit log, if you like, of all the changes that happen to the file and making those available. Again, certain scenarios. And this was also cool. So using that, so anyone who's used Cosmos DB will know one of the great things about it. It has that concept of a change feed. So whenever a record changes or inserted in the Cosmos DB, you can have an Azure function fire off and do things. So this same idea now sort of applying to blob storage. So all those different state changes for the blob captured in change feed, which you can then use to drive whatever it is you need to drive, kind of event-driven stuff or stream processing or however you want to do it. Kind of cool. Object replication is now GA. So that's being able to define, I actually want you to replicate this from this storage account to this storage account. And you can define policies to define that. So it's not just replicating the whole account. You can define per object or per container or per wherever you want to do, where you want them to be replicated to. Very handy for a whole lot of time. And point-in-time restore for storage, just like we've kind of talked about point-in-time restore for the other stuff, which now that we've got versions and things like that, you can understand how that would work. And I thought this was interesting. I haven't used it yet, but I think this is interesting. Attribute-based access control. So rather than saying, okay, here's the level of access on a container or on a blob, you can actually go further down and base the access control based on certain properties of the blob. So for example, you might tag your blobs with a certain privacy rating or a criticality or a source system or whatever metadata you want to tag your blobs with. You can then define access control policies based on that. So that can be very granular and very specific to your use cases. So I think that one's actually pretty interesting. Azure NetApp files went GA. So if you don't want to use Azure files, you want to use kind of a more industrial grade thing that you're familiar with. If you've got NetApp, that's basically NetApp as a service. Super awesome. That went GA. Lots of people who use that are excited. I lost my train of thought completely then. So, ADLS, so anyone using the data lake storage, there is a new tier, and as well as the new tier, probably also more important, is a 33% price drop for premium files, which is always a good thing. And just like in Azure Storage, you can choose which tier depending on kind of what your access patterns are. And I think we're nearly there. Spring Cloud, fully managed Spring Cloud for all those people doing lots of awesome Java stuff. Steel Toe, don't you love open source frameworks? They just got the coolest names. So Steel Toe is a framework to help you develop and manage microservices. So if you want to use that in the Spring Cloud, you can now do that all as a managed service. And it's not here yet. I'm really sad, but I'm very, very excited by this one. So Azure Communication Services. So this is a unified service that will allow you to do any kind of communications, right? So if you think of your app and you need to send an email, if you need to send an SMS, if you need to make a telephone call, if you need to make, create teams and drag people into a Teams call, all those things exist under the Azure Communication Services. It's currently in public preview, and the telephone and SMS stuff at the moment, as when I checked a couple of weeks ago, is still only in the US, but I'm super, super excited. And this one's for you, Adam. This is what Adam wants to use. But this will obviously roll, this will need, for different countries, have different telco providers. There'll be a different timeline depending on when they stitch those deals up and all those kind of things. But if you need to do any kind of communication stuff, this will be the service. You can bring it all into one place. Voice, video, chat, SMS, all those kind of good things. Draws breath. So again, as I said, I didn't cover everything that's happened in the last quarter by any stretch, and I didn't go very deep. I guess thinking about it, I guess I kind of noted these kind of 5 things. There was definitely some themes there, right? So one of them is this idea that non-Azure resources becoming first-class citizens. So think, for example, Kubernetes. Kubernetes running on top of Azure. It has its own ecosystem, but now even within that ecosystem, those things are getting surfaced up into Azure. Then you can apply policies and you can manage them in the thing, which I think is very, very cool. We're obviously seeing a lot of work on providing more flexibility on where you can run things. So lots more services being available in containerized versions, things like logic apps running on the functions runtime, all that kind of good stuff. So really allowing you to put the service where you need it. Right? Sometimes it's close to the data, sometimes it's close to the machine, sometimes it's wherever, right? And that hybrid control plane. So there's a whole bunch of things, but Azure Arc, but this idea, even the cost management, that regardless of where you put your things and in what cloud it's running or what framework it's running, if you want to, you can use more and more of the Azure control plane, whether it be that cost management or policies or Azure Arc, to manage that. So you only have to manage it using one set of tools. The other thing I noticed was this one, I didn't quite know how to express this, but so you think about cross-cutting concerns, right? Like security and identity and alerting and all those kind of things. Up until now, a lot of these things have had different things. So if you were doing IaaS, you kind of had a security place you went in Azure to look at your IaaS security. If you want to do PaaS, you kind of went somewhere else. If you were running SQL, you went to the SQL thing. Well, more and more now we're seeing those services and a lot of those announcements where all those things end up being surfaced in the same place, which is, I think, really cool. And obviously Dark Troopers. We don't like Dark Troopers. And that was it. So I'm drawing breath. I hope that was useful. It was super high level and super fast, and I apologize for that. But I guess it just kind of shows what's been going on. I mean, bear in mind, that was the last, 2-3 months. So yeah, lots and lots going on in the Azure world. Always lots of good stuff to learn. Hopefully that was useful. Happy to do it. Oh, I was going to call this out. One thing not a lot of people necessarily that I talk to know about this, but if you go to azure.com/products by region, you can go to and you can select, okay, I'm interested in Australia East. It'll show you all the services and the things that aren't GA yet. Like it'll tell you what's in public preview, what's in private preview. And if you kind of hover over that, it'll tell you when the GA is expected, or the next phase is expected. So that's very handy when, people often ask me, do you know when this is coming? This is fed directly from the engineering team's backlog list and whatever. So if you go to here, you're basically getting the latest and greatest information. Yes, and happy to take questions. Otherwise, Merry Christmas.
That is an awesome presentation, Todd. Thanks for that. That's fantastic. Are you able to share that slide deck?
I do. I'll need to let me take out some stuff, mainly videos and things, and I'll share it, and I'll send you a link down. We can put it on the included in the maybe the link on the video for the YouTube in the description. Might be the easiest way to do it.
I imagine those Yoda videos are all NDA, so you'll need to strip those out.
I hope it's not. I just like this. Who doesn't love Stormtroopers reindeer? Come on.
Great job. I didn't actually see any questions come in. Lots of comments, lots of people liking some of the features that have been announced, and a lot of people very happy with your presentation too. If you look in the comments, so yeah, fantastic.
I'm definitely going to refuse to do another update one though. I'll get one of the other CSAs to do that. I want to build a fun one again. I need something with blinky lights and slightly to moderately ridiculous. I've been working on that for next year.
I'll ask a quick one, just because no one else is. I saw mention of the Azure Firewall Premium. I can't see any. It's news to me, and I can't see any reference to it. Is it obviously still in preview? You might not be the right person and putting on the spot, but just interested in.
Yeah, I don't know if it's. I thought I did not say it was in. It was in preview. I thought it was public. Here we are. Sentinel. No, it was above here somewhere.
Networking.
Networky. Oh, was it in the networky? Oh, no, yeah. Oh, yeah. Security, then networky. That's right.
Yeah, I think it was around the load balancing.
Firewall manager. Firewall premium.
Yeah, that's it.
So should be public preview November 2020.
Okay.
Now, when it's in public preview, that's why you need to check. It might not be available in Australia. I don't know that for a fact. So
yeah, true.
But if you go and have a look at that page I showed, it'll tell you where it's available.
Yeah. No, cool. I knew it was coming. I just hadn't.
Yeah.
Let it hit region particularly, but yeah. That's
reach out if you can't find it, and I'll track it down. But yeah, it is definitely public preview. But yeah, not everywhere.
Very good. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let me stop sharing. Come on, back you come. There we go. Stop sharing. Right.
Excellent. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Feel free to come off mute if you want.
I like Anthony's one. An Azure orbital strike. Yes. Xbox as a service. Well, yeah. Stay tuned on that one. That's kind of interesting. Satellites of probes, just like other countries. Yes. Awesome.
All right. Well done. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this this last presentation of the year, and that everyone has a safe and happy Christmas. And there will be hopefully something in January. Stay tuned for the meetup site. We'll post it there. But definitely, as Damien said in the beginning, if you're interested in sharing some of your knowledge, we're keen to have more speakers step up from the community. Otherwise, you have to listen to us all the time, and that gets boring.
Not sure if that's a threat.
It's definitely a threat. Fantastic. All right,
guys. Appreciate it.
I'll
Thanks, everyone.
stop the recording now.